Hey guys, I'm Will from Tested.
And it's Norm from Tested.
Norm, SteamOS has been out for more than a month now, about 6 weeks. While we were off on holiday, Valve rolled out the SteamOS early beta, made it free for everyone. You can just go to their website and download it. And now we've spent some time with it.
It's an operating system to run Linux games.
Yes.
Using the Steam front end.
Yeah, so it's basically, it turns a PC into a console kind of front end. Once you have the OS installed and configured properly, it boots straight into Steam, big picture mode. It looks just like big picture mode does on your PC or Mac or I guess Linux box running Steam. And you can see it right here. This is it. We're running it right now. It's designed to be used with a controller. Oops. I have a Xbox controller right here. It's Xbox controller native. It's free, so you can just download it. You don't have to pay anything.
And
free.
That's the big compelling thing, because before you could run SteamOS or Steam Big Picture mode from Windows. And
you could.
You build a PC, you have Windows on it, you run Steam on it, and then you load up Steam Big Picture mode, and you can still use your controller. But to run in your living room, that means booting into Windows. It means launching Steam.
It's $100.
And Windows is $100.
Yeah, I mean, you could, and just to be clear, you could bypass Windows. Go straight into Steam, assuming you had the know-how to do that. But it's a lot of overhead to play games. If you're building a $500 gaming machine to put in your living room, it's $100 to buy Windows these days.
That's a fifth of the price.
Yeah, so not having to run Windows is a big benefit. The other thing that you can do is run a smaller, lighter PC, something that maybe doesn't have a bunch of big fans or a huge video card, and then, in theory, at least, stream video games from another big computer into a small, tiny computer in the living room. I have one of those machines set up down here. We'll show that off.
So there are a lot of configurations for how you can run SteamOS, a lot of hardware configurations, and we're going to show a couple of those today. When you talk about streaming, it's similar to what this thing did. This was the NVIDIA Shield that we reviewed, and this was basically just an Android device, and you could stream over Wi-Fi.
Open it up. Show people in case they don't know what it is. It's a controller with a screen.
Controller with a screen.
Yeah.
And this could stream over Wi-Fi from a local box with NVIDIA video card.
The PS4 and the Vita have similar functionality. You can connect your Vita to your PS4 and play PS4 games on the Vita streamed across Wi-Fi in your home.
And it was like what that service OnLive did, or Gakai before PlayStation bought it, except locally in your home as opposed to paying for a service and having it streamed offsite.
So the thing that's new with SteamOS that hasn't really been possible before is that you can actually do wired-to-wired connections. The Shield, the Vita, not counting OnLive because that had to come across the internet, but in your home, you have much lower latency with a wired connection, with a wireless connection. So I was interested to see if you were able to play, like where the border was on stuff that you could play versus what you wanted to play versus what was actually good when we were testing it. We'll talk about in-home streaming at the end of the video. Let's just jump into the OS experience and show people what this thing is all about.
So people who have maybe used Steam Big Picture mode should look very familiar. You have your 3 nav bars, store, library, community.
You can buy stuff and you can talk to people on the internet. You have like notifications, so people can, here's jumps into a web browser and dumps you to the community page, I think.
Yep.
So it's friend invites and I think I also have notifications for new items and stuff like that if you get TF2 drops or whatever.
And then settings, a little more in settings, because this is going to run locally and on top of your Linux box. So you have a lot of your audio, video, network settings built in here.
So the nice thing about this is, even though this is running on top of Linux, and you can shell out to the Linux desktop, which we'll show you in a minute, they have, over the last couple of weeks, already started adding in-Steam controls for things like system audio. So assuming your audio is set up right, you can choose which of the audio outputs you want, whether you want to use the HDMI output or an analog output, and on down the line. If you have multiple sound cards, theoretically that works. Some of this stuff is a little hinky. It is definitely a beta. At least in my experience, when you put 5.1 audio on, it stops working every single time.
Stereo,
same for you?
Just do whatever works to get audio working. And even the audio playback sometimes is not that great.
But even now,
other settings, so display, network.
Yeah, there's not settings for things like resolution.
No.
You can't set the resolution that the SteamOS runs in. It just runs in at the native resolution of your monitor, which I kind of like being able to change that stuff, but I'm also okay with it as this is. There's voice settings. I think these are actually probably in Big Picture now. I think they just recently added these. A lot of the stuff that's coming into Big Picture as a result of this SteamOS beta seems to be getting pushed into the betas, at least on the Windows side as well. And then there's also stuff like the family library sharing and family view. So family library sharing lets you say these 5 accounts are all members of my family. You can share your games between them. So if I'm playing BioShock Infinite and you don't have a copy of that, if I'm not playing BioShock Infinite, I have a copy of that and you want to play it, we're friends. We can share across our accounts.
It's like back in the StarCraft days when you could use one CD and let 3 other people
play.
play.
Or Red Alert. You have the blue CD and the red CD. I'm going to be the red guy. You're going to be the blue guy. Family view is, this is in Big Picture on the PC as well now, too. This lets you lock out games that are inappropriate for your kids.
Okay.
So it's all like...
In a network, you have wired and Wi-Fi.
Yeah, you actually can choose which networks you use. We seem to be, I think we lost our wired connection, I guess. Yeah, it's unplugged. We should probably plug that back in. At least before we do the streaming,
yep.
Yeah. But you can choose Wi-Fi. Now, it is a Linux box, so I did have some problems, of course, at least in the earlier betas, getting things like Wi-Fi working and Bluetooth working and even audio working. They're updating this constantly. Like while we were setting this shoot up, there was a beta client that got pushed out. And there's 2 different things that can be beta here. One is the client, which is the thing that we're looking at now. Mm-hmm. The other is SteamOS proper. SteamOS proper is a version of Linux, Debian Linux. It's based on Wheezy something. I don't know what Wheezy. Usually it's 2 things, an adjective and an animal, and they're alliterative. So maybe it's a Wheezy Weasel. That seems a little bit on the nose. The SteamOS updates will require a system reboot. The SteamOS client updates I don't think do usually. Either way, when you restart the machine, you'll come back in and it'll say, hey, we're unpacking some stuff, and then it boots back up into SteamOS just like normal.
And you don't have to boot, like we said before, you don't have to boot into Windows. When you turn on the SteamOS machine, it will launch right into this Big Picture mode. You can go into the desktop,
so this
for example.
Is,
there it goes.
Okay, now we're boned.
Now we're boned.
Okay, never mind, we're going, forget the Linux desktop. It's under there.
So underneath the SteamOS is a Linux desktop that you can go into your system preferences and find drivers and install them manually.
Yeah, if you're proficient with Linux, you can add Debian Wheezy repos to the system. Valve seems to be running their own SteamOS repos that have the drivers and stuff that they have tested on their different hardware configurations. They're constantly adding new stuff to that, like Intel graphics drivers, AMD graphics drivers got added a few weeks ago. Intel Sound got added. I think Intel Wi-Fi got added this week. Norm and I both had to install that manually. If you're proficient with command line tools and know how to use apt-get, it's easy. If you don't, then the way to find out how to fix those problems is by searching for Debian Wheezy and then whatever your problem is, because you're not going to find a whole lot of help with SteamOS at this point.
And that was kind of what determined the basic system requirements when they launched SteamOS. If you do Google search, how do I install SteamOS? What are my system requirements? A lot of that stuff that was announced back in December was because they didn't have the hardware support built in, but a lot of that support, Realtek audio drivers, the Wi-Fi drivers, is built in natively now.
Yeah, and that's made it a lot easier. Just the difference in 2 weeks between when you built your system and when I built my system was pretty huge.
Now you're controlling with a
This is an Xbox gamepad. This is the 360 gamepad. The Xbox One gamepad doesn't work. The PS3 gamepad works pretty well, assuming you have Bluetooth in your system. You need Bluetooth to connect to it. The PS4 gamepad's a little weird, because you can actually just plug it in, and it'll use the wired connection, which is a micro USB on the controller end, regular USB on the other end. That works great. I was even able to get it to sync over Bluetooth, but there was some weirdness with controller configuration, so I'll show you how that works. When you set up a controller that it doesn't recognize, and I don't see where controller is. Here we go, controller. Then you have the opportunity to edit controls, and it shows you a picture of what it thinks you have, or at least what the default gamepad is, and says, okay, this button, primary action, should probably be the bottom of the deep digital buttons. This one should be the right D button. So then it kind of is it's directing you into a standard Xbox 360 / PS3 controller.
It's like the old PC gaming days.
Pretty much, except for I think this system where it gives you the little dot and tells you which one you're trying to get is actually quite good. It worked really well.
That's useful.
The only problem I found was that on the PS4 controller, the triggers showed up as digital buttons rather than analog axes, which could cause you problems if you're trying to play like racing games, stuff like that.
So
that
what if I
actually
want
uses
to play
analog
with a different
axes.
peripheral, like keyboard and mouse?
I don't think that this is for people who want to play with keyboards and mice. I think that this is, if you're going to put this on a desk, maybe. I think that given the fact that there's no default Steam, desktop Steam interface, they're anticipating that you're going to use this with a controller. The fact that you can, when you're streaming stuff, the controller works much better than a mouse and keyboard. Like this is a keyboard, this is a gamepad interface, not for your living room, not a lean in and play Civ 5 or whatever your favorite.
But if you had a Bluetooth keyboard or wired
you can plug it in and it'll work.
It'll work. That's how you're going to access that Linux desktop.
You may, depending on which install method you need, you may actually need a keyboard and mouse plugged in to do the install. You'll probably definitely need that to set up BIOS stuff or UEFI stuff, whatever the new term is. And that's pretty much, that's pretty much
the interface.
it. Yeah.
That's the OS. It's made to be as simple and easy to access and easy to get to your games as possible. They learned so much from Big Picture Mode and how people are using the interface there, and now they just want to get this in the hardware. And so Valve has hardware partners.
Yeah.
Making like Alienware, and they have a dozen.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people making machines.
Dedicated machines, but of course, because you can download SteamOS, you can install it on your Windows PC, or you can,
hold on.
Well, you could theoretically,
if you install it if you use their default images to install it on your Windows PC,
it will get rid of everything.
It will wipe your hard drive. So don't do that.
Don't
That's
do
bad.
that. Yes.
But yeah, theoretically, in the future, you'll be able to install this on a Windows PC if you want. If you already have Windows and you've already paid for Windows, I'm not sure why you'd want to dual boot other than just curiosity. There's actually not that many Linux games available, at least right now. I think probably in the future we'll see that. As before, you can go up here and filter by games that are installed, games that you've played recently, games that you've put in your favorites, or games that are Linux games.
Gamepad only gamepad supported games.
Exactly.
Games on a local network they can stream. But yeah, right now, as of when we're recording this, just about 300 games. A bunch of them are Valve games. A bunch of them are old games. In terms of,
I think it's closer to 500, but it's still it's a relatively small handful of games. Of the stuff that I have, it's there's real highs and lows here. Some of the stuff is great. There's a lot of Humble Bundle games because most of the time they have a Linux version. So things like Bastion and Super Meat Boy and Fez and like some really phenomenal games are in here. Broken Age is available here. I think The Cave is. So all of the Double Fine stuff, most of the Valve stuff, I think, is at least in your Left 4 Dead and
Counter-Strike, but not CS:GO.
CS:GO's not in here yet?
No, I could not find it.
Oh, that makes me sad. The thing that's missing really more than anything are the big AAA games. So
Batman Arkham City.
There's no Arkham City. Like basically, if EA, Ubisoft, Activision, Warner Brothers, Disney, any big publisher released it, it's probably not going to be in here. And look, you're right. There is no Source, Condition Zero, Counter-Strike Condition Zero, deleted scenes. No Counter-Strike. No, not the new Counter-Strike game's not in here. Dave Defeat, TF2, Left 4 Dead, I believe. That kind of stuff's all in here. Like I said, if you have Windows on your machine already, probably you're not going to bother installing SteamOS unless you just want to noodle around with it. The thing that this is for is if you want to build another machine that you can put
for your living room.
Yeah, someplace else in your house, maybe your living room, maybe your kid's room, whatever. That's what this is for. And conveniently, you and I have done just that.
Absolutely. So we're going to take a quick break now and show you the two machines we've built for different purposes and what we think about them so far.
Okay, so the first thing that most people needed when they were building a machine is a system with a UEFI BIOS. Well, that runs UEFI instead of BIOS, I guess, if you're being technically accurate.
Right. So Valve said, here are the system requirements. And the big things were you need an NVIDIA card launch. They said you needed a 500 gigabyte hard drive, which we've seen may
all
not
of this
the
has
case.
changed.
Right. And they said you needed a motherboard that supported UEFI.
Yeah, it's hard to say.
Instead of BIOS. But that's, yes, you're right. That's what's changed completely.
It's all changed. Now, if you have a machine that supports UEFI, that's going to give you a better experience. It's going to boot a lot faster than the BIOS-based machines, at least the ones that I've tried this on.
And the install process.
The install process, I actually had a kind of up and down install process. So I instead of building a big machine, I wanted something that was going to sit in my living room and be as small as possible, and basically kind of be like an Apple TV for streaming video games into the living room. Right. I ended up with this guy right here. It's an Intel Nuke machine, which stands for Next Unit of Computing. But it's basically a Core i3, which one, 30-something, 3217U.
Okay.
So, I don't know what that means, but it's a mid-range to low-end processor. It's dual core. It has kind of crappy integrated graphics, but it's tiny.
It's the size of an Apple TV, a little taller.
It's a little bit bigger.
But it's not an ARM processor machine.
No, it's an x86 processor. You buy these as kind of bare bones systems, so they come with the motherboard and the CPU, and then they have typically a power brick, like an external power brick, like a laptop, which this machine has. This one needed a SSD and an mSATA SSD, so it's one of those little tiny narrow card-looking SSDs. If you wanted to put wireless in it, it has antennas built in, but you need to provide a card and then RAM. So right. I added all three of those things all in. This was right at $450. You have to buy a power cord. So it comes with the brick, but you need to buy that little 3-prong cloverleaf thing to go with it, which is another $4. I assume that's because of some dumb regulatory thing. But this machine has two HDMI ports, 3 USB ports, and wired Ethernet, all of which were important to me.
So the big advantage for this machine that you've built, and to be clear,
it's not really a build.
We built these machines, and on Tesla.com we have extra behind-the-scenes video of building the full machine.
Yeah, if you're a premium member, you can go to the site and watch that right now.
But we didn't want to do that right here.
Yeah.
The advantage of assembling this machine and using this is the size.
Yeah.
So price is about $500.
It's a little. I mean, you could probably do it cheaper. If I were doing this again, instead of spending $80 on 8 gigs of RAM, I think you'd probably be fine with 4 gigs. I think you probably need. I did a 60 gig mSATA SSD, which is the smallest that I could find that seemed like it would work. The way the SteamOS formats the hard drive, it gives 10 gigs to the root, 10 gigs to a backup partition that has an image of the OS installed without any of your games and stuff. It does a small swap file, and then the rest of the hard drive gets used for your home home partition, which is where the games are actually installed. I think probably 30 gigs is the minimum you're going to want left over for that. This machine has 30 gigs of partition left for game installs. That's a lot in the world of Linux games, because the biggest thing you're looking at is maybe 1 to 1.5 gigs for something like Bastion.
The locally installed games.
In terms of hard drive capacity used by games that are available on Linux today, TF2 is probably 12 gigs. The next biggest thing is Bastion or something like that, around 1 to 2 gigs. So 30 gigs will go a long way.
And the advantage of this, in addition to size, is power consumption and noise.
Power consumption, it's a little noisy it's a little noisier than I expected. It has a couple of vents on the back, and it does make a fair amount of fan noise especially when you're playing games locally. The other thing I really liked about it is it comes with a VESA mount. So what that means is this thing on the back basically screws into the feet of the case, and then you can hook this onto the screws that hang off of the back of your TV for wall mounting.
Right in the center.
Right in the center. So it's going to be any noise it makes will be muffled by the TV and the speakers and all the stuff surrounding it, and it means it'll be completely out of the way. So I can run a power cord up to it, Ethernet cord up to it, and then plug it into HDMI on the back of the TV, and everything goes out to the TV
and then
via HDMI.
Your controller dongle can plug into that, and no interference either way from the back of the TV.
I didn't bring it over here, but yeah, the controller dongle is just if you're using PS3, PS4 controllers, you can use Bluetooth, or you can use the Xbox 360 wireless controller dongle, plug that in. They're kind of hard to find if you don't want to buy them with a controller these days, so it's a little bit of a bummer.
As a local system, then, because we're not ready to talk about streaming
yet,
what can you do with that? Like, what type of local games, the Linux games, can you play? Media playback, what can you do with that?
The media playback stuff just came in literally as we were sitting down to do this. Like, that was the update that rolled out this morning.
I mean, this will have no problem playing any game, the movie from Steam.
It should. I would expect, given the hardware in this machine, that you should have no problem playing 1080p H.264 video that's streamed across a wired network. The local games that I played, the indie stuff like Super Meat Boy and Fez and Bastion, it is not 100% 60 frames a second, buttery smooth like you. Well, so, okay, Meat Boy is, but the like Bastion kind of gets a little bit chuggy when you hit when there's lots of activity on the screen. It's not bad. It's better than an Xbox 360 than the experience was on the Xbox 360, or at least equivalent at worst. And then the smaller games are great. Like VVVVV is indistinguishable from playing on a high-end PC. Nidhogg is a PC game, so it doesn't work natively on SteamOS, and there were some issues streaming. Same thing.
How about any of the adventure games?
I did not play any of the Double Fine adventure games.
So the 3D games, they're
mouse and keyboard for the most part. So I played stacking on my MacBook. And that was fine. It's a different OS, so the driver situation is a little bit different. But the upshot is the Linux drivers were for the Intel graphics on this thing. Even though it's the mid-range, low-end Intel graphics for current generation, Haswell CPUs, it was fine. Like, even at 1080p.
So you talk about MacBook, it's comparable then. I mean, the driver situation and the architecture situation is a little different, but if a game can run on like a MacBook Air, or integrated on a MacBook, or integrated on an Ultrabook, then that's how it's pretty much going to run.
You're in the same situation. Like I said, think 2D stuff is going to be great. 3D stuff is going to be fine up until you reach, like you're never going to play Batman Arkham Asylum on this machine. It's not going to be a good experience. Right. But you'll totally be able to play Meat Boy and VVVV, and if there's a Linux version of Samurai Gun or Nidhogg in the future, those games I would expect should run fine. So on the flip side, I thought that an Apple TV box makes sense if you're going to do streaming, but to build one like you built was $500, around $500. Yeah, I think you could probably get it to $350 if you really cut some corners. Cut some corners there. $450 is probably realistic. Right. And I want to see what a lot of people are doing, and a lot of manufacturers are doing, which are they're building full PCs and selling full PCs with dedicated graphics, running SteamOS. It's small PCs. Small PCs like Falcon has their Tiki PC, and I try to build a reasonably small PC. So you save some money doing that, because things like you pay a high premium for those mSATA SSDs because they don't make a lot of them and they need to be very small, and mine was $1 a gigabyte, which is a lot. So I sacrificed the power consumption advantages and the size advantages, and basically put SteamOS on a full PC, and that's what I have right here. And the parts here they're contributed by BitPhoenix, so we actually really like this case. This is the BitPhoenix Prodigy, the same case that we built Lloyd's PC out of last year, and I got the white one because it kind of looks like Aperture Science. But the parts are basically a mid-range PC. So you have an Intel Core i5, it's a 4570, a GTX 7 series, so it's a NVIDIA 760, which is not what we would recommend for like your desktop PC. We recommend the 770. This is a tier lower. And an SSD, which I didn't need the 500 gigs, 256 gig SSD, just to see if you could even fill up local media and games. So just to be clear, neither of us have built machines that fulfill the 500 gigabyte requirement. No. Everything worked fine. Everything worked fine. You don't need 500 gigs. Below 60, like I would look at 60 to 80 gig SSDs as the cutoff. Right, so I want an SSD and a small form factor, relatively small form factor. That's a big small form factor case. Yeah, it's a micro ATX with some expandability. So the idea is that maybe someone wants to experiment with SteamOS, and then or we'll put Windows on this. Yeah. So this case actually comes in both Mini ITX and Mini ATX trim, Micro ITX, Mini ITX and Micro ATX. So which one did you built the ITX one? ITX. Yeah, okay. Yes. So this is the ITX one. It's about, the case is the same size, so where you're getting the same size. So built this machine, installed SteamOS, and like you did, but I want to download 3 games. So Octodad, Left 4 Dead, Team Fortress 2, and no surprise, those games run fine. Octodad worked great on this, just to be clear. So the selection for local playback just is pretty limited when you're installing just on Linux. It's Linux games. I mean, I'm going to go to the store right now so you can see what's around here. There's a Linux-only section when you're on the SteamOS or any Linux version of Steam. And, there's some good stuff here. Don't Starve, obviously, is a great game. Dota 2, I know people like that. Meat Boy is one of my all-time favorites, but you're not going to see, and there's even stuff like Metro Last Light. You're not going to see AAA games from big publishers. GTA 4, GTA 5, should that ever be announced for PC, won't be available. BioShock Infinite is not available. Injustice isn't available. None of the AAA big games you buy on discs for consoles are going to show up here. And when you buy a game and you go to your library and sort it, you can sort by what supports gamepad support, but in the store, it's just Linux,
its platform.
So you can also see gamepad support
When in your library.
gamepad support and Linux support in your library. So I have over the years apparently gotten a bunch of little Linux games in bundles and stuff like that. They're all here. You can find them. But I think the main thing most people are going to use this for is probably playing big games in their living room on the TV with a controller instead of in their office hooked up to a monitor.
So what we're saying is it's not the best idea to build or buy a Steam box and just run SteamOS to play local games.
I don't think I'd even bother, judging by what's available, Metro being the obvious exception, I don't think it's probably worth putting a discrete graphics card in a SteamOS box right now. If you can get something that has an APU or something like that, although we haven't tested AMD systems at all with this, but if you get something that has decent integrated graphics, that's going to be fine for what you're probably going to use this for.
Now you can always put Windows on this, and now we're going to talk about the install process of installing SteamOS, and which has changed, like everything with
it changes constantly. So as it is right now, there are 3 official Valve ways to install SteamOS. One of them is beta. The whole thing is beta. One of them is more beta than the other 2. And then there's a 4th thing called Ye Olde SteamOS that some guys on Reddit put together using Debian. And
that's just a modification of the installer.
It's a modification of the installer that supports more stuff. So whereas the initial Valve releases didn't support anything other than UEFI BIOSes, the Ye Olde SteamOS supports most BIOSes and a much wider swath of hardware. Valve has since said, hey, these are some great changes, Reddit guys, thanks for making these, and released a beta image that incorporates a lot of those changes. It doesn't have quite the same breadth of hardware support, but looking at what's supported, what they've added and removed on the Reddit threads, probably makes me think that the stuff that they support is what a sane person would try to run this on. And if your machine isn't supported by that, probably you shouldn't be trying this.
So I built this $1,000 Steam machine, and it makes the most sense then to dual boot it, to run Windows also on this.
I don't even think I'd bother putting SteamOS on it.
Well,
I would just put Windows on it.
If I want to put SteamOS on this, if I'm committed to running SteamOS, then I also would want Windows. Now, what's the best way to install Windows on SteamOS?
So the only way to do that right now is to use either the beta installer, which is in the Steam community forums. If you go to the URL at the bottom of the screen, then there's a thing that says, here's the easy way, here's the advanced way, and then it says click this discussion link. You click that discussion link, and then there's a sticky thread at the top of the forums that says here's the beta installer. This is going to assume that you have some Linux experience. Of the methods for installing this, the 2 default Valve ways will wipe your hard drive. So you will lose Windows, everything that you have on it if you run them, if you just put that disk in and press OK and keep pressing OK.
And this is about having Windows already installed first and then installing SteamOS as a separate partition.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't actually done that. I thought you were going to try that on your machine, didn't get around to it before we did the video. But yeah, typically when you install Linux and Windows, you install Windows first, and then you follow it up with Linux, because Windows knows what Linux knows what Windows is. Windows doesn't know what Linux is, so the Windows bootloader installer will overwrite grub. There's some tricky stuff. I had some problems setting up even with the advanced method. So if you can use the easy method, you should. It seems like the easier way to do it. Like I said, it'll wipe your hard drive. It just basically copies an image over to your hard drive and then detects the hardware that's different in your machine from the default image. It only works if you have a certain size hard drive. My 60 gig SSD was too small, so I don't know where the cutoff is for that. I didn't test it with 10 different drives. But if you have less than a 500 gig drive, I'm going to assume you probably have to use the advanced method, which involves booting into Linux and running a couple of scripts. Mm-hmm. You have to kind of know how to do the partitioning a little bit. You can just press enter and it'll take care of the main part for you. But I would say you have to have a little bit of Linux expertise. At some point in the future, there will be an easier installer. I'm sure that's a late priority for this. They're trying to get the games and the desktop stuff working right now. The good news is once you get the install done, it's pretty easy to use. I mean, it's just like big picture with some extra stuff tacked on. All
right.
So yeah, and if you want to get Ye Olde SteamOS installer, the URL for that is reddit.com/r/SteamOS. I want to reiterate this. We've done this now 2 or 3 times over the last few weeks. It has changed every single time. Something has changed every single time, whether I have to install drivers or not install drivers.
Has it gotten worse?
No, it's gotten better every time. Okay. So if more stuff works out of the box each time, I'm sure 6 months from now you'll just put a USB thumb drive in your machine, and magic will happen, and then you're gone.
All right. So you have a SteamOS box, you have SteamOS running.
Yeah, this is it right here.
And
here, I'll show
local
you.
games, not too many, a couple hundred games you can play locally. What can you do with the streaming then?
They just added, actually, while we were shooting this, the ability to stream music. I don't have any music on this machine.
It's a beta. Steam
It is a beta, but there's a music player in here. I would assume at some point they'll also add like a Plex-like function. I mean, ideally, they just put Plex in here so you can have a top-level thing that says, hey, launch Plex. I would love that for streaming videos and stuff like that to this kind of box in my living room. The music player, I assume, so you can listen to music while you're playing games. But when you go into the library, the thing that happens that's interesting is, so those are the Linux games. Here are the installed games.
And installed doesn't just mean games installed locally.
That's the trick. So if you look at the list, there's another subset that says local games. That's 13 titles, installed is 20. So it's actually connected to another PC running Steam, logged into my account, because that is important, on my desktop. And this is the mix of stuff that's installed locally and on the computer. So for example, BioShock Infinite, Borderlands 2, those are Windows-only titles.
Yep.
Or maybe Windows and Mac, but for the most part, let's say Windows-only titles. Fez is, I think, installed both locally and on the testbed machine.
So you hit Y, and there's more ways to play.
Yeah.
And so you can choose whether you want to play it locally or stream it.
So for example, I'll go over here to Super Meat Boy, which I know is installed on both. Is that right? Maybe not. You can even, so it's installed there. It's installed on this machine. Actually, it may not be installed on this machine. I can download it to this machine. If you have something that you have, for example, Thomas Was Alone is on this machine, but not on the other machine, I can install it there, and it'll go ahead and start downloading.
On your remote?
On whichever machine you choose on this menu. I don't know exactly how you manage downloads on this. There's some stuff that's obviously missing. Like normally there's a downloads filter here, and you can go see where your downloads are. There's also no way to tell how much disk space is being used. So, I mean, I don't think it's probably a huge problem given what most people are going to be using these machines for,
right.
But I'm sure it's something that'll come in the future.
On the machine that you're streaming from, what settings you have to configure your streaming options?
So the settings are the same on both sides. It's a little bit unclear to me what they actually mean. Let's go to the in-home streaming settings. So this is where, and you can have multiple machines connected. If my Mac was turned on with Steam logged in, it would say, oh, hey, Will's Mac is here too.
And you can stream to Mac.
You can stream to Mac. It seems like right now the best configuration is to use Windows as the server. That's where most of the bug fixing comes in, like the audio glitches and stuff like that. That was a problem early on that I talked about in the two articles I wrote about this. They seem to be fixing that pretty rapidly. Using Mac as a server is a little bit less reliable. Using Linux as a server is probably the least reliable. But it seems like everything can be streamed to. So I can sit in the
stream from Linux to Windows, theoretically.
In theory, in practice, you're probably going to stream from Windows to everything else.
But Steam will stream to Steam.
Steam is client, Steam is server. The client and the server are the same software.
Wow.
As long as you have the current beta version of the client and you're in the in-home beta, in-home streaming beta, you can do this. They'll roll it out to everybody in the future, I'm sure. So you have some settings here. I'm not sure if these are server-side settings or client-side settings. So typically when we want to make sure that we're doing this right, I set the same settings on both sides. Okay. So we have some tests where we did some latency testing, and we ran the same settings on both the server side and the client side.
So here you have bandwidth and frame rate.
Yeah, bandwidth. It seems like from my testing, it uses about 10 megabits per second at 1080p maximum.
Is automatic better than just setting
I left it on unlimited.
Okay.
I have not actually tested a ton of that stuff because it seems weird. There's some weird mouse control issues on this form. Like when I go down, it skips to there, and then I have to go back up to get to limit resolution. I typically, since I have a big monitor, I have a 2K monitor on my desktop at home. I don't generally run a. I specify that I want to run it at the resolution of the TV. Okay. Because I don't want to render at 2560 by 1600 and then I have to come down.
Now, when you're launching something like BioShock, you can change the resolution in game, and
that seems to do really bad things. So I would strongly recommend that you let the video card on the server side handle the scaling down.
Don't change any.
Don't change settings once you get into the game. Okay. The other thing to mention is the resolution that you can stream seems to be dependent on the connection. With wired, I've been able to stream 1080p on the games that work well with no problem. With wireless N, either 5.4 gigahertz at the office, which is kind of a congested network area, even at 5.4 gigahertz, I find 720p is the most you can stream reliably. This seems to me like if you're really serious about playing games and you want quality, either you should run an HDMI cable from your office to your living room, or you should have a wired Ethernet.
Well, let's
demo
this, and we can show the difference between the wired and the wireless.
Yeah, we have some high speed of me playing Super Meat Boy, and we're going to do streamed.
Okay.
Even though it's installed. Just to be clear, this is a dumb example because Meat Boy is Linux native and I could run it locally and it runs great on the machine by itself. However, for the purposes of demonstrating
and so right now this configuration we have is networked.
Yeah, this is networked. It's interesting because Meat Boy, that was the first time, we just reinstalled Windows on this machine, on the server machine. So this is the first time I've played Meat Boy and it crashed. Usually when that happens, what you do is hold down the center button. It'll give you an option to force quit whatever game you're stuck in. If you get in a game, some games don't have good exit options,
right.
So you need to use that for that as well.
What happens if it crashes on the server side?
If it crashes on the server side, sometimes it fixes itself. Sometimes you have to get up and walk in there and click on something or restart Steam or whatever. Like I said, it's beta software, so expect jankiness. So right now, we're going to stream from the testbed. I'm going to launch this again. In fairness, I think that was probably a Meat Boy crash. Meat Boy sometimes crashes on launch if it gets confused about controllers and stuff. So I think we're good here.
All right.
We're launching. Now in the bottom of the left corner of the screen, you can see it gives some information about the streaming, and it gives a little, that graphic on the right, I hope you can see that, is basically a lag meter. It's latency and bandwidth.
So you have spikes in terms of latency.
Yeah,
and it goes from 0 to 100.
Actually, it's bandwidth is what that is. So it's the blue line is latency, the red line is bandwidth, I believe. I could be completely wrong on that. I can't read it from here because it's too far away. But basically, what you're seeing when you see those spikes is lots of stuff changing on the screen at the same time, or a lot of audio coming across.
And it tells you your latency, the combination of your input latency with the game rendering and also display.
Yeah. So typically, you're looking at like 20 to 40 milliseconds latency on the render. We have high speed. We only shot at 120 frames per second with my iPhone. But you can see that when you jump, there's a little tiny bit of, like 3-4 frames of lag.
Which for
basically.
Super Meat Boy,
it's disastrous for Super Meat Boy.
That's not good at all.
It doesn't matter because there's a Linux version of Super Meat Boy.
Right.
But it basically means that on a game that requires super precise controls, things are going to feel real floaty in the same way that they do when you have a bad.
And some of that is attributed to the renderer of the game.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it, there's a speed of light thing. Basically what you're doing is you're taking the frame buffer out of the video card, you're converting it to H.264 very quickly, but still that takes time. You're sending it across the network, which takes time, and then you're decoding it again, which takes time.
Let's quit out and try a wireless connection.
Wireless connection
this is our optimal connection.
Is going to be bad.
Yeah.
The thing I found is that, like I said, for stuff like Meat Boy, you're definitely not going to want to play that with streaming. However, with stuff that's kind of single player,
racing
games are fine. I wouldn't play anything competitive probably. I don't know if I can disconnect the wired. There we go. Okay. And then we're back in.
Yeah, and you can launch something.
Go back to Meat Boy.
Meat Boy.
Please don't crash. Nothing's happening on the server side. We can see both monitors. You guys can
and there's
see one.
other jankiness in terms of controllers not being recognized.
Yeah,
some games.
Some games that work. I think at some point in the future there will probably be. Oh, it's because I disconnected from the network. The server's got to reconnect. Yeah, there's a lot of jankiness. It's the kind of thing that you expect when you're using a beta product.
And there are things like not only controllers not working, but some games that need to play at 60 frames per second will only play at 30. Nidhogg, it just looks chuggish.
So I don't know.
Sluggish.
I don't know if that's actually what the problem is, but that's what it feels like. It feels like it's rendering at about half speed. A lot of 60 frames per second fighting games like Injustice have the same problem. Those are problems that I know that they're working on this on a game-by-game basis, and because it's Valve, they're probably doing it in a very data-driven way where they're looking at like the stuff that people actually play and going down that list and fixing it from the most played to the least played. Okay, let's go back to in-home streaming. We're going to reconnect. Okay, there we go. Oh, nope, disconnected.
There we go.
Connected to testbed. Okay, great. Let's play Meat Boy. And then it's disconnected from testbed. Good God. And we're back connected again. Our wireless environment is really terrible here. We have probably 200 access points within that pop up every time we launch
Our router
wireless.
is less than 10 feet away from the computer.
Yeah,
that's where our connection is right now.
I guess what I'm saying is the wireless experience was a little bit better at home.
I like that spike.
When I tried it.
That's a great spike.
But yeah, it's not like for a game like this. It's not playable for Saints Row or something like that, where you're kind of just noodling around and it's hard to die. You're probably okay.
There's also the games, because they're being compressed, you see a little bit of visual artifacting. The contrast is off.
Yeah, it's tough. I wouldn't want to play like a Metal Gear game where there's a lot of FMV video, just because it's double compressing video is kind of bad, and this really highlights the problems with that. So yeah, you can see.
Before, when we're on the wired network, it was aggregating what Steam was reporting about a 50 millisecond aggregate lag time.
Yeah.
Here, it was showing around 70 earlier, but look at that inconsistency, and that's what the worry is.
Well, that's not latency, that's bandwidth being used. So it's a little bit different, but yeah, seeing...
You're at 120, 110 millisecond delay.
Yeah, and we're doing, I think, about 10 megabits per second video right now. 8 to 10, it looks like. From here, I can see 5 digits. So, it's your experience may vary. If you live in the middle of a field in Idaho and your Wi-Fi is good, you'll probably have a better experience. You're still you're not going to play Meat Boy ever probably streaming, which makes sense because you can install it natively and it's 200 megabytes. But Twitch games, I would never play a Spelunky daily challenge game streamed. I can show you what it looks like over wired. It's not a great experience. So what else about
streaming? The rendering here, it supports, we're talking about the local machine supports NVIDIA and ATI, AMD video cards. On the streaming machine, it theoretically supports any video card. So this is not like NVIDIA's H.264 native encode on their GeForce 7 series cards.
Well, so everybody has support for the H.264 native encode now, even Intel in the CPU.
So it will render through CPU.
It's unclear. They haven't said what it works. When I asked how it works, they said we're not talking about that yet. So,
but the fact is that it will work with any configuration.
Your mileage is you're going to want a video card that is 1 or 2 years old at the outside. Right. I think in order from there's a big thread on the Steam forums where people have posted their configuration, what their experience has been. Once you filter out all the people that have bad wireless networks and are like, this is terrible, then you can look at the video cards and it becomes clear that 2-year-old ATI video cards have problems. GeForce's prior to the 600 series, when they added the H.264 compression, has problems. I don't know whether they're using the CPU side or the graphics card side. I do know that my machine at home has a GPU that has H.264 encode, but my CPU does not. So I know at least they're using the H.264 encode on the GPU that's in my system. But if you have both, I don't know how they choose what to use. I gotta assume they stick with the video card just so there's less stuff going across buses. If you have neither, it'll probably work, but you're not gonna be able to use it.
Software encode.
Yeah, it's a bad experience. You need hardware encode for this. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Like I said, there's a lot of weird issues. Like I found on my home machine, I have a pair of headphones and a sound card on that machine. If I had the default audio set to the headphones, it works great. If I have it set to the sound card, the sound comes out one or both places. They actually patched that yesterday. I left the machine here last night, so I don't know if that fixed that problem. But the devs seem to be very active both on the forums, and they're emailing people who have issues. Like I had posted about a couple of issues that I had, and they emailed to get specifics. As a result, it seems like those things are getting fixed very rapidly.
And SteamOS, this beta with streaming, is being released slowly to users. I think you had a big push a couple weeks ago.
I think if you want the in-home streaming beta, it seems like, and I don't know for sure, but the thing that people say on the forums is that if you have a Linux, if you've built a SteamOS box and connected on the same subnet as your main Steam machine, then they'll roll you out the next time that you get in the beta, and then you'll be able to test the in-home streaming.
But I think the upshot is, regardless of the building a machine with a dedicated system or even a small nuke style box, a $300 to $500 system, it is not worth it right now.
I mean, if you can use that small Nuke-style box for something else, like if you want to have a Plex machine in your living room, go nuts.
That's a $500 Plex machine.
It is a $500 Plex machine when you can do the same thing on your Roku for $100.
$100. Yeah. The long HDMI cable still is better.
I think the long HDMI cable is a much better option
right now.
And that's only if you want to play games in the living room. Like I have a big ass TV in the living room. I love playing games there. It's great. But the list of things that are still weird, like launchers not working right, and it's probably not worth it.
We got to imagine that 6 months from now there will be SteamOS, the software will be better, streaming kinks will be worked out, local game support may be better.
People will be developing games
for Linux.
Both either knowing that they're going to work with streaming or knowing that they're going to work with Linux. If we look at this as compared to Steam controller support adoption over the last 2 years since they rolled that out, that really took off. And it took off as a result of them putting that icon next to your games in the store. Right. And if you don't have it, then they can show the publishers, hey, people aren't going to buy this if it doesn't have this.
And also down the line, not only will there be cheaper systems, but also dedicated systems just for streaming that might be under $200.
Or ARM-based systems. There's no reason this couldn't be an ARM-based streaming only.
And of course, the big thing that we haven't talked about is the Steam controller itself that we saw at CES. Yeah. And that's supposed to be a big part of the living room gaming experience. And so right now, this is all kind of bootstrapped together to try to get that working.
Yeah, right now the living room experience for this machine is controller only. Like realistically, I'm not going to use a keyboard and mouse in my living room. It's a universally bad experience. But when I get out and can play more strategy-oriented games, more mouse and keyboard games, if I could play Rim Capsule in my living room, I would totally do that. That sounds great.
Wow, this is almost a 200 millisecond latency in BioShock.
So
that's ridiculous.
The thing that I noticed is that you don't. I think I'm still on Wi-Fi. If I had to guess,
if I'm looking left and right, we can see both the local stream and the living room stream, and it is a significant delay. Maybe it might not affect your actual gameplay in this type of game.
That's the weird thing is I think they're doing some sort of like time travel with the inputs so that you don't notice it. Like I don't feel like I'm lagging. Like I have latency issues at all.
But visually, it is.
When you're looking at them side by side,
apparent.
And when you do fast camera turns, like there's a little bit of a whip around at the end. The other thing to mention is that mouse and keyboard are kind of bad because you can move the mouse so much faster. It feels very floaty. Their prediction doesn't work very well. As a result, with the gamepad, you have a limited set of inputs that you can use, so they're able to predict a little bit more effectively, and you end up with less float.
And that's a problem that they were going to have to solve because of the touchpads on the Steam controller.
Yeah, and I for what it's worth, I think that it'll probably be. I think as the hardware on the software on the client end gets a little bit better, we'll see less of that. My hunch is that there's probably a lot of overhead in this Linux install to make the decode faster and better and remove some of that latency. So yeah, that's the SteamOS box pretty much.
SteamOS, it's very beta. It's getting less beta every week.
I mean,
but
just
still beta.
If we're ordering things in level of beta-ness, I'm gonna put Oh, we're getting to the racist part of BioShock. I'm going to back away. I'm going to put the OS as the least beta part.
You mean Linux and the front end?
Linux and SteamOS is least beta. Like that is something, once you get it installed, you can use. It's great.
It's a great boot up experience where you press the power button, it quits.
You see the Steam logo right up front. You can play Linux-based games. The experience is really good. The install, more beta.
Way more beta.
Way more beta.
But also getting better.
But also improving literally on a daily basis. They're pushing patches multiple times a day, it seems like, to not necessarily the installer, but SteamOS and the Steam client on SteamOS. And then the streaming, super duper beta.
Super beta.
But also improving very quickly.
And then around the same level, the game support, local game support, and controller compatibility.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be interested to see if we see more Linux versions of games as a result of this. This happened because Gabe was tired of Windows, it seems like, in Microsoft's Windows Store nonsense. So if this pushes big publishers to support, if we see Linux native games from Ubisoft, EA, Activision, 2K, or Disney / Warner Brothers, whatever they are now, I'll be really surprised. but it will be because of this.
On the flip side, I'd be totally happy with them fixing streaming and just SteamOS being a good streaming box, a cheap streaming box.
Plex, please put Plex in here.
Yeah,
that would be great. Anyway, so that'll do it for us today. SteamOS, wait and see. It's neat, but don't spend money on it yet. See you guys later.
Bye.